SteamWorld Heist is one of the best tactics games I've ever played. Heist 2 keeps the core of the first game, but turns everything else up to 11. It's way longer with more missions, a full overworld and a more ambitious story. It's basically SteamWorld Heist, but more in every way. More doesn't necessarily mean better though. I've already covered the first game in another review. This video is going to focus on what's new and what's changed in this game. If you're unfamiliar with the first game, make sure to check out my video on that, linked in the description. Perhaps the first difference you'll notice is the new overworld. Instead of selecting missions, you now drive your submarine around an open world. You can equip your submarine with a variety of weapons, which all handle slightly differently. You also gain the ability to submerge under the water to dodge attacks and explore new areas, although you are limited by an oxygen meter. The submarine combat is okay, although I felt it outstayed its welcome. It does add some extra danger to the overworld, but the combat doesn't feel particularly deep. It also feels at odds with the core gameplay. Dodging around and broadsiding in real-time naval combat doesn't really have much to do with the turn-based tactical gameplay found in the rest of the game. I didn't find the naval combat particularly difficult, but I could see it being frustrating for players who just want to play a turn-based game. In addition to the combat, you're rewarded for exploring the overworld. Hidden around the world are secret shops, permanent upgrades, challenge missions, and other collectibles. These rewards feel powerful and often encourage you to experiment with what you've found. A benefit of the new overworld is that it gives the world more cohesion. The levels no longer just take place in space, and each area of the world has its own quirks. Heist 2 is more of an adventure than the first game, and the overworld does a good job of selling that. The biggest downside to the new approach is that there's more downtime between missions now. The bounty system exacerbates this, by sometimes requiring you to sail through the same areas over and over. Overall, I feel neutral about the submarine sections. I enjoyed the exploration, but didn't particularly care for the combat. Now let's talk about that bounty system I mentioned. When you complete a mission, you gain bounty. However, the characters sent on that mission get tired and cannot be used for the rest of the day. When you go back to a bar, you can rest and cash in the bounty you've earned for rewards. The intention of this system is clear. It's designed to encourage you to use every character to do as many missions as possible. Whereas in the first game, I'd usually stick to the same characters for a single playthrough. In this game, you really do have to use all of your characters. It also factors into mission choice, as the number of characters allowed on each mission varies, with some missions only requiring one character and some requiring as many as 5. You're often forced to make trade-offs and keep some of your higher level characters for later missions. This led to me varying my compositions far more than I did in the first game. The downside of the bounty system is that it forces you to go back to the bar. Having to sail to the bar and back can hurt the flow. That said, I do think this system works. It gives you a real incentive to mix up your teams, whereas in the first game there really was no reason once you'd found a team that worked. Each mission rewards reputation depending on how many characters survived and whether you completed the optional objectives. Once you get enough reputation, you can move on to the next area. This does mean you can skip a ton of missions if you want, however I decided to complete every mission. The game gives you powerful rewards for getting all the reputation in a single area. On Elite difficulty, I found myself looking for every edge I could get. While all the systems around missions have changed, the core gameplay of Heist 2 stays close to the first game. It's turn-based tactical combat on a 2D plane with manual aiming. There are new tools to play with, but it still feels like Heist at heart. The missions felt more varied than the previous games. The levels tend to be more open with tons of possible paths. I often split up my team to cover ground faster, which is something I only did a few times in the first game. The mission variety feels wide enough to encourage you to experiment, without too many of the missions feeling gimmicky. The enemy types are more varied in this game. As well as each faction having unique mechanics and enemies, it feels like there's a lot more enemies in general in this game. The levels have a huge box to pull from to create unique challenges. This only gets more prevalent later into the game, when missions begin to include multiple enemy factions. The only issue I have with missions being more varied is that they don't give much indication of what they will involve. This meant I often had to quit a level to adjust my team. This will vary depending on the difficulty you play. On lower difficulties, I imagine you can brute force a lot of the missions. The character progression has been completely overhauled. Characters no longer have classes. Instead, classes are determined by the weapon they are carrying. Characters do still get unique bonuses, but these are limited to 2 skills each. This is probably the most controversial change to the game. Characters have separate levels for each class. They get every skill in their current class, as well as being able to splash into a limited number of unlocked skills from other classes. It takes a while for the system to open up, but once it does, it allows for a ton of customization. Combining a character's unique traits with skills from different classes allows for a lot of customization. Any character can be any class, so unlocking a new character feels less exciting. However, there's a lot more freedom to experiment. This system does allow you to follow cookie cutter builds, but generally you want a well-rounded team. I didn't find the balance to be perfect. The Reaper class has far more ability to perform multi-kills than any other class. Because of this, I splashed into Reaper on most characters. I found that some combinations are clearly more powerful than others. For example, at level 4 Reapers gain a once per mission ability to enter Harvest for a single turn. While you're in Harvest, whenever you kill an enemy you get an extra attack. Usually this only means a couple of extra attacks, as it can be hard to chain kills together. However, snipers can reliably hit enemies from pretty much anywhere on the map. Snipers and Reapers also both happen to have abilities that boost their damage for the rest of the turn. This gives you enough damage to reliably one-shot almost any enemy. By combining all these abilities on a sniper, you gain the ability to kill everything on screen in a single turn, no matter how many enemies there are. Piecing together this combo was hugely satisfying. The problem is, none of the other combos I tried were anywhere near as powerful. Leveling up characters takes a long time. If you keep experimenting, it's likely you'll end up with some characters whose combos work amazingly, and other characters who feel weak in comparison. The other downside is that the weapon-based class system hurts replayability. After I completed the first game, I wanted to go back and replay it using different characters. I don't see myself doing that with this game. The combinations I wanted to try out I did. There's no entirely new skills for me to discover on a second playthrough like there was in the first game. I do like the new progression system. Building out your own custom combos can be rewarding and adds a new layer of strategy to team building. That said, I understand why it's a controversial change and some players aren't going to like it. Like the first game, Heist 2's difficulty encourages you to explore its systems. I played on Elite difficulty and I found it to be harder than the first game. The extra difficulty was welcome as it encouraged me to plan out my builds for each character. The game has a wealth of options to outfit your characters and it rewards you for exploring them. If your characters fall behind on higher difficulties, it can become punishing. On lower difficulties you have more freedom. Because of this, the difficulty is well balanced. You can choose a difficulty setting depending on the experience you want. Although the game still takes place in the SteamWorld universe, the setting is completely different. Instead of taking place in space, this game takes place entirely on a single planetoid, a flooded shard of the destroyed Earth. Instead of a spaceship, you're sailing around on a submarine. This gives the game more of a pirate theme than it does sci-fi. The water on this planet is beginning to cause rust. You and your crew set off to figure out why. In my opinion, the writing is better than the first game. Although the plot is straightforward, the characters feel more complex and believable. The only problem with the characters is that the actual crewmates you play as are relegated to side characters. Heist 2 features a broad cast of interesting characters, but the playable ones are some of the least interesting. The new setting brings with it new factions. My favourite are the Rattlers. These robots have responded to the curse of rust by replacing their metal limbs with bone. They view this as a kind of transhumanism. You must either accept the way of bone or you have no place in the coming world. You'd think adding a faction of skeleton robots might stretch the setting, but they actually fit in well. They also look great, with every Rattler enemy having different combinations of grafted bones. Heist 2 is gorgeous. You'll travel through many biomes in the game, each with their own mechanics and visuals. While the first game also looked amazing, it did have less variety in its environments. There's not much else to say about the visuals. You've been watching it on screen during this video, so you can judge for yourself. Steam-powered Giraffe return for another great soundtrack. There's a bit more of a sea shanty vibe to the songs, which makes sense given the setting. I liked the music, but it did feel a bit underused. You mostly hear the music in bars, but you rarely spend a long time in them. This leads to you hearing the first 20 or 30 seconds of the songs over and over. That said, I did enjoy the soundtrack. Heist is a worthy successor to the first game. It expands on just about everything and in my opinion does so successfully. If you're a fan of the first game or of tactics games in general, then it's a must play. Even if this isn't usually your kind of game, it's still a fun adventure with a ton of charm, so you may want to give it a try. It's been a while since my last video. I bought a house and in general have been super busy with work and real life stuff. I'm trying to revive the channel. I want to get back on my Evolution of Zelda series as soon as possible. If you'd like to see more, make sure to subscribe. It helps me a ton. I'll see you all next time.